Welcome to Caffeinated Mornings, a show built around the idea of more conversation and less presentation. We dive deeper into discussions that go beyond the surface of the work. A big thank you to our sponsors who make this show possible. Today's episode is brought to you by the award-winning, strategically driven, independent, full-service agency TDA Boulder. And we can't forget Buck Ross Productions and Coop Studios for helping us capture and share this show with you. A special thanks to The Coffee Ride for keeping us caffeinated, and to Realtor Michelle Sander and the Zeal Group at RE/MAX, CMCI Studio, Snappy Little Numbers for our theme music, and Pro Photo Rental for their continued support. In this episode, we join everyone's favorite designer and host, Jay Farrakane, for an insightful conversation with co-founder and CCO of Geezer, John Kieselhorst. In this talk, we chat about getting started, finding your way, looking at the creative industry and who it serves with a new lens, but most importantly, realizing that your best work only comes when you're open to being surprised. So, get comfortable, get caffeinated, and get ready to be inspired and informed with our newest friend, John Kieselhorst. Let's go.
I felt like I hadn't seen you in the longest time. We met at Colorado Ad Day.
You know, I think that I presented at Caffeinated Mornings in like 2013, and I was like nervous
Told you it's
as
been going
hell.
on.
It was like 6 months into Made or something crazy like that.
It was more TED Talkish then.
It was kind of TED Talk.
Yeah, I was like, I backed off. I'm gonna let you do your thing, you know. But now I'm engaged, so, you know. So
yeah. Well, I mean, this is great.
Well, and then we were just talking with Parisa about this, that you actually, in those earlier days, you interviewed me for my, I think it was called the visiting professor of design role.
Oh,
you
wow.
were on some board.
Whoa.
That shows what impact
You let
I
me
made.
on that board. Jesus.
That's what I always wonder. Who's given us the responsibility? And then, like, the thing that always struck me about you, though, is like very cerebral, spiritually thoughtful, creative person, a little bit of like crumb with a dab of like acid in it kind of thing, which has always like intrigued me about you. But I'd love to, in the lead up to this, I don't think I ever got to ask you that. Like, how do you describe yourself as like a creative person or a maker?
I mean, I think I'm sort of like I like to think of myself as a ruin of the counterculture. You know what I mean? So I'm sort of this like, I don't know, this artifice or this artifact from the 1960s that somehow washed up, you know what I mean? Like in
See, my crumb acid reference might not be that far
sort
off.
of grunge punk days of the 1990s. And you know what I mean? Like I'm just here because I haven't died.
Well, we're going to get to Geezer in a minute about that. Well, looking back, is there anything like, we got to touch a little bit about your kind of formative design career. Did not start out undergrad, like traditional path into design.
At all, no.
So what was the first thing that like sparked you into like, maybe this is a path for me?
So I had the benefit of, I've always had the benefit of having amazing people in my life that just kind of, for whatever reason or other, feel compelled to speak truth into my life, right? And so I was hell-bent on going to grad school in probably 1992. And this family friend of mine who was sort of my idol at the time, he'd been in the Foreign Service, he was a lawyer, you know, super smart dude. He'd like run for Congress, you know, which was like really, I was kind of blown away by this guy, you know, like he was cool. And, but he was like, man, you gotta seriously think about going to law school. You know what I mean? Like it is going to suck. And it is going to, you know what I mean? Like just take everything out of you. And he's like, just think about doing something else, you know, like think about doing something creative.
Isn't that terrifying when people in an industry tell you not to go into that industry?
No, I mean, and for whatever reason, you know, like hard-headed and thick as I am, like there's something in that just like resonated with me. And so I got a job right out of college selling art supplies, believe it or not, at this little art supply store in downtown Portland, Oregon. And, you know, and that kind of set me on this new path, you know, and I ended up working for a guy named Josh Berger, who still runs this little magazine called Plasm.
To this day?
To this day, yeah. And it's sort of like it's kind of like a music zine with like a production budget, you know? It's like he would get paper from Mohawk and he would always invite sort of design luminaries to design covers for the magazine. And so, we carried the magazine at the art supply store, and I was like, man, maybe they need an intern, And I just made this like book. I'd made a handmade book of my paintings because I'd been painting through college. It was sort of like the outlet, it was like an art outlet for myself, but I'd never really thought of it as like a career or vocation. And so anyway, I brought this handmade book down to show Plasm, and this guy, one of the partners there who'd gone to RISD was like, this isn't design. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what this is, but like, this is not design at all, And that, it cut a little bit. Like, it was sort of like, it hurt me, but it also sort of like intrigued me to sort of learn more about what they did. And so in the course of a year, unpaid internship, sleeping sometimes on the light table, and they pay me because we'd get like freelance gigs from Wieden & Kennedy to make ad artwork and stuff. But, it gave me this great adjacency to the business, and I would sit and watch Josh, do all the key commands, and I would ask, you know what I mean? I was like, how did you do that? And so I
This was before Linda and before any tutorial videos were available, because I was the same way.
Before
I learned Quark that way.
Right, exactly. Like, this is the dawn of the internet still, And so I sat there and I taught myself Quark Express and Illustrator and Photoshop, and and that was it. That was sort of my path. And so I put a little book together, and I ended up applying to go back to art school, and was looking at a bunch of different places, and it was weird because looking back, actually, I just realized this as we were talking this morning, but Plasm had David Carson do a cover while I was working there, and then this guy Ed Fella, or this woman Rebecca Mendez had designed a cover like after Carson, and then Ed Fella had designed the cover after that. And I was like, oh man.
Did you actually get to meet them?
Well,
or was it the era of like shit showing up in the mail? It was all
just like done through FedEx. You know what I mean? Like things would just kind of show up, and you'd like make notes on them, and they'd send them back. And that was my job at the time, was like running the packages down to FedEx, right? Like I'd have to truck down to the FedEx office, which was across the street from the original Wieden & Kennedy building, the Deacon building on 2nd Avenue in Portland. And you know what I mean? Like that's where you took your shit to go out, especially at 5 o'clock when the East Coast
there was
deadline.
Probably everybody was in there trying to get art out and stuff. Yeah.
But anyway, so I ended up going to meet Ed down at Cal Arts during the summer, and ended up only applying to that one program, and fortunately got in.
Grad program.
To the graduate school, and they were pretty open, you know what I mean, and pretty permissive as far as the people that they would take, because my background, my qualifications as a designer, you know what I mean, like my book at that time was like pretty arty, you know what I mean?
I think that's kind of like a neat blend,
it was pretty not designed,
but maybe that's what it needed too at that point.
Yeah. I mean, but I think they were open to that, you know what I mean? Like they were, like RISD and Yale were not at all.
Which is kind of ironic,
you know what I mean?
right?
Like there was the opposite of that. Like you had to have like a formal background, you know what I mean? Like you were better off if you like knew what Basel was.
Right, and the grids.
Yeah, right. So
Carson would say the other.
Yeah.
You don't need to know that.
Well, and I think, Ed was one of those people who was really transformational in my life, because he had gone back to graduate school in his 40s, and ended up going to Cranbrook, and, he'd had a full design career already in Detroit in like automotive advertising. And so he'd done all these like spot illustrations, and this was like back in the mechanical days, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is all sort of pen and ink and waxers, and and that's still kind of Ed's process.
Yeah,
like,
he was a hero of mine, like for sure. God. And his breadth of ability was really
I wasn't
cool.
aware of who he was, right, until he kind of did this cover. And man, I went to visit the school and ended up spending about 45 minutes in Ed's office, which was pretty much the minimum amount of time that you could spend in Ed's office if you walked in there, because like Ed's one of the most garrulous people you'll ever meet, and he will it's like the Ed show, you know what I mean? Like he is constantly historicizing himself and kind of celebrating his own genius, and you know what I mean? Like, and really like and really into it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like super into it to the point. But he will find ways of sort of tying you in. You know what I mean? Like it's the most delightful form of narcissism. In a lot
that's
of ways.
super
You know what I
cool.
mean? Like,
Well,
it's
do
just
you
incredible.
think, like I'm always so excited when I hear people talk, I think because of my participation in school now, or even the people I've influenced through internships and things that have been in my studio. But I'm always excited when I hear people talk about, gosh, the impact they made on my career is really important. And we'll talk about legacy later, but like, do you find yourself drawing from any of the fellow conversations and things as you
I think
process
Ed
work
is
today?
like deep down, like you mentioned Crumb, but I think Ed is like truly like my hero, of sorts. Like his design work, just like the conceptual bedrock of it, and you know what I mean, like his knowledge of art history and design history and philosophy, and I mean it runs super deep. I mean, it is just insane, the brilliance of that man and his approach and his thinking and his questioning of what design is, and that to me was like just really inspiring to be around.
Well, it's interesting too to think about, when I talk to design students, and you go through this, especially in your recent career stuff about hiring people. Thinking about like designer backgrounds that you're looking at today, or all creative types, art directors, whatever you want to call them. Like, are you able to see some of like anything that's missing in education right now? Like we talked about art history a lot, and like how that gave us this toolbox of like, oh, I'm gonna apply constructivism to this, or some Bauhaus brutalism to this one, or whatever it might be. Those give us entry points, right? Are you seeing anything missing like that in designers today? Because I don't feel like art history is as big of a requirement anymore.
Well, what's really interesting, right? So I met a ton of really amazing people at CalArts, and one of them, the head of the program at the time, is this woman, Louise Sandhouse, who's like an AIGA medalist this year. Actually, so is Rebecca Mendez, believe it or not. But, and I'll get to Rebecca in a second, but, Louise has opened up this thing called the People's Design Archive, and it's a really fascinating way to, I think, approach design history that is sort of breaking down these boundaries of what history used to be, at least as I was taught it, right? Because the transmission of history was done through the printed page and these tomes of recorded history that someone had taken the time to synthesize.
And that's a selection usually.
It is a selection,
right?
Yeah, it is. And by virtue of needing to be concise, but also by virtue of that sort of privilege, right, of being the one who's of casting that, right, of being the Megs or whoever, like those storytellers really do determine, or did get to determine, I think in large part,
who gets represented,
right? And very often that was like just entirely reflective of their own implicit bias, right? As a white man, usually,
history is written by the victors usually, right?
Yeah, no, completely. And so I don't know. I think things like that are starting to really upend this notion, right? Because one of the things that's always been fascinating to me is this search for the undiscovered or the uncelebrated or the unknown, you know what I mean? Like within the history of design, because there is so much to this, right? There's so much history, and every rabbit hole you jump down, there's just kind of like endless amounts to discover.
I mean, we've all found those designers that you're like, how come nobody's ever heard of this woman before, or whoever it is?
Right. I mean, it's the same in music, right? It's the same in all these fields. And, my old partner, Connie Pirtle, used to say, like, there are many art worlds. You know what I mean? And that's sort of the beauty of this world we inhabit, right? Or this thing that we're drawn to. Is that there are many design worlds, there are many design histories, and that's discovering those things is really important and exciting.
Well, with that shift, even in like, them building this public archive, there's been a lot of debate around what's art, and it used to be based on how long will it last, its permanence, right? And I think that's been challenged recently. I think there's also this notion now of like, what's design? What's not design too, right? And so it's an interesting parallel that like maybe we've gotten the ability to find all these little niches and shit. It's getting harder and harder to define, which is kind of rad in my mind. And that's another thing I dig about you is you usually have this like excited optimism about like the unknown shit. Because whereas most people get like nervous about it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm fascinated by, like just the visual world and what we don't know about it, Like, yeah.
In the lead up to this talk, we talked a lot about industry, common things we see, particularly our obviously advertising, design, art. You worked across a lot of disciplines, and the more I've gotten to know you too, finding out that you have a pretty hardcore design background, which I've always saw in you as like ad guy, right?
Yeah.
That's my impression. Right. Sorry if that's wrong, but like, how has your approach to like design or making evolved since you first started? Like, in the old days where you were like more like, you said it yourself, I didn't have really a design book. You were doing more art and layup, and I think to me there's a beauty in that. But like, how's your process evolved kind of like from back then to now? Is it similar? But the work is obviously different, but like,
I mean, I think I've always sort of taken a kind of like a research-based approach, right? And so there is kind of this like this thought, right, that is like ideas unfold or concepts emerge, right? That you can start from anywhere. You can start from these like first impressions or these like, like intuitive like responses to an assignment, right? And I think more and more as I get older, I rely more on that, right? Because I think that in your youth, but I mean, it also has, what it's done is I try to see each project or client as a unique opportunity, right? To explore something that's like latent in that, you know what I mean? Either brand or assignment or whatever, right? There's a latent field of interest there, let's call it. And, within that field of interest, you know what I mean? Like your job as a designer is to sort of like chase down those possibilities. And I think that is like, I've always thought of design in terms of this possibility curve where you start with the largest, you know what I mean? Like this infinitesimal amount of possibility, right?
Right.
And your job is essentially to winnow that down to one, you know what I mean? To this singularity of an idea. And that, for a long time, it was exciting, but then after I reached a point too where that becomes kind of sad.
Because they don't get to birth them all.
Well, yeah, because the possibilities are sort of like, for me as a creative person, the exciting part, like considering the possibilities is the thing that really delights me,
Well, and it's funny you mention that because like I think one of the things that I've remarked on or I've noticed as I've gotten further along in my career, we won't define it by age, but the notion of, I remember being on creative teams and we would get our assignments in the old days and you'd run back to your cubicle and we'd start working or whatever we would do. And I remember we worked with an older creative at one point and he would just grab his jacket and his pack of smokes and we'd watch him walk the waterfront. And we were like, what the fuck is this guy doing, dude? Like, he's got to get to work.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? But he was processing it. Yeah. And now I find myself in these ways of where the manifestation used to be the solution, meaning like the making of it. Oh, I'm arriving at the thing now.
Right.
Now I kind of like do these more gut checks, some research, and I'm like, oh, that's the solution, or at least a number of any combination of them.
Sure.
And then I'm like, oh man, now I gotta go make it. Like, it's like, fuck, that's labor, dude.
Yeah.
And so like that's the thing I've noticed that's changed in my work. Do you feel like that once you get to that arrival of like, shit, I know where this should be? Is the execution a challenge to you anymore?
I mean,
the labor of execution. And you do elaborate shit too.
It can evolve because I think here's where it gets interesting. And this is where I think that the executions become another sort of fun opportunity, right? Because in my career, the thing that I've loved the most are the projects where the execution involves a whole team of disparate roles and responsibilities, right? And so it's an opportunity to create surprise. And I had this experience once where we were making some bags or whatever, and I took them down to this little, like kind of sign shop in LA that was, I forget, they sewed like vinyl banners, but I had them make these like bags out of their, vinyl. And I just kind of like gave a loose sketch. It was just literally like something that I'd written on one of their invoice sheets, right? And it was like, cool, just make this, right? And I didn't specify a typeface. I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like, make this. And the thing that came back, like the object that came back was so beautiful to me, right? Like, it was so surprising because it wasn't something that I had chosen, right? Like, I had specified the parameters around it, but it was like a surprising object, right? And to me, that like unlocked something about the idea of, and the importance in collaborating with other people, right? That if you're not able to sort of give up your preconceived notion of what things need to be, and I don't mean that from a kind of vision sense, but I mean that from a kind of spiritual opening sense, right? Like that if you're spiritually open to being surprised, things work out better. You know what I mean?
But I do think
things work out a lot better.
It's a core tenet of brand, though, and product and everything.
Right.
That if you get that little bit of delight in there, and it's funny because I look at you as a true creative director a lot of times. Like, you're building teams, but a lot of creative directors, that's probably generalizing, but whatever. Here I go. A lot of creative directors want to fucking lock everything down so hard, and they don't realize that like that beauty that comes in. I know when I work with animators and I give them my graphic designer linear sense, too overdone, like fucking transition in a film.
Totally.
That when they give it back to me, they're like, yeah, we kind of understood what you want, and it's so much better. And you're like, thank God you brought that skill. I too find a lot of joy in that. One other topic that came up as we were kind of talking about this was disruption, and I think when you explained your impression of disruption back to me, I think that's when I really realized, like, I'm like, John is like fucking hardcore designer, that you're coming at it from this like pragmatic, it always has to have a reason standpoint. I don't know if I have any students in here, but I know I've told many students, like, if I look at something and I say, why is this on the page? Whatever we're looking at, screen, and they say, because it looked cool and it doesn't have a real reason, I force them to take it off. And so one of the things that was really interesting is that you said that there was something beautiful about disruption only works if it's intentional.
I mean...
And where do you stand on disruption? Because it's such a thing in advertising.
I think I'm sort of, I don't know, like I'm going through something right now where I think this, like some of these things are getting like disrupted in my own thinking, right? Because, I don't know, in some ways it's sort of like, if you're to create something new or something unique or something truly original, it's like, couldn't a perfectly great response to that challenge of why does it belong on the page be like, why not?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
I just want an answer usually.
You know, like, I think that, I don't know, to me, it's sort of like, because that brings you back around to listening to your gut, right? Or listening to things, like doing things for reasons that you may not rationally understand in the moment, right? But can kind of work back to over time, and being more intuitively guided by, you know what I mean? Like, guided by voices, as I like to say. One of the bands of my youth.
Well, it's funny because disruption came up in this notion of, I had a conversation with a creative director who is much more on the ad side, and he said to me, "Yeah, we should work together. It'd be fun." And I never thought of like work as fun, and I realized like a lot of times ad people approach work as like, it's why you see things like a guy in an ape suit on a mini bike jumping a pizza delivery guy or something, because it'd be fun to fucking make, right?
A gorilla playing a drum set to Phil Collins. You know what I mean? Like, who doesn't want to see that?
I mean, but like, it's fun to make. And then you have to get back to like, what's the why in it? And I think that was the one thing that I've really thought about recently is it feels like me, when I look at creative in general, usually for a commercial purpose, AKA ads, the responsibility of the person making it was just to get someone to show up. There was no ownership afterwards. There was a different responsibility, so they could be very disconnected. And now I see a lot more through line, because like ad agencies will go build Domino's, good example. You build an app on the other side of getting the app right to work. How does disruption function in that whole scenario, because it has to be more about purpose at that point, because it's so much more connected. It's not just
for sure.
Get him to the door, and then the rest is your fucking problem, Brand.
I mean, at that level, for sure. At that level of like business strategy and, thinking and purpose, you know what I mean? Especially when you've got an organization the size of Domino's, right?
Yeah.
And the scale of that operation, like those decisions really matter, and they matter to people's lives. You know what I mean? They matter to people's livelihoods. And that's a humbling thing. And, it's something you try not to think about, especially as a young creative in advertising, because you're just trying to, you're just trying to put one over on people. You know what I mean? And I think that's how I used to see it, is just like I was perpetrating these, like I was getting away with this shit.
So you had a consciousness
about it, getting
though.
away with like getting a client to pay for this asinine thing that I wanted to do. You know what I mean? And so, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it's, you know what I mean? Like it's you learn things.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, one thing I've always said about like creative maturity is this notion of like, I don't know who said it, but they interviewed some guy and he gave an answer. And then 3 months later, the same journalist came back and asked the question and he gave a different answer. And his reply was, I know more now.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that it was like, I was telling you an untruth or anything like that. I think one of the signs that we feel is when you get to creative maturity, you just kind of can think about things different with a newer arsenal of like information. And so like, one of the things that if I'd asked this question 3 months ago for you, like it would probably be a different answer, but give us a rundown on Geezer, which is this new idea you're kind of running into.
I mean, so Geezer, I can't take credit for this idea, right? Like this is a woman that I used to work with at Made, and Made, we can talk about this notion, right, of what a purpose-driven agency is, right, or a purpose-driven entity.
Made had a purpose.
It's become a kind of buzzword, right, in culture, and Made had purpose, right? And so I met this woman, Karen McKinley, through Made. She was the first sort of adult creative director that we could afford to hire, and we just won like this fried chicken account, that was Churches.
Yeah,
chicken.
I remember.
And it was a lot of work, like it required like some dedicated bandwidth and from an adult, that could kind of manage the clients and do all the things. And so that's how I met Karen. And she's just one of those like salt of the earth writers and thinkers, right? Like she's known that she wanted to be a copywriter since the 6th grade. She's a Minnesotan, and she speaks. You know what I mean? Like I think the two of us are very great counterparts because I think she kind of she disrupts me. You know what I mean? As an intellect and as a kind of culture snob, and you know what I mean? Like And so I don't know. Like we have a good contrast in our skill sets. And Karen came to me this idea about doing an agency based around a life stage, right? And it just so happened at the time, I just kind of like parted ways with another startup that I'd been working on, and I've been reading a lot, in the press about this fact that we are getting a lot older as a society, as a world. Actually.
More people on Earth right now over 50 than any other age
ever
group, right?
before, right? And more on the way. Like 2030 or 2031, I think millennials start to turn 50, right? So that adds another 70 million people to the pool of over 50 in this country. And I'm not sure. It'd be an interesting thing to hear from the students in here, because I notice it, right? Like I start to notice it, especially in places like Boulder, but other cities as well. That as you walk around, there is a noticeable aging to our mix as a population, right? And anyway, so. And the other thing that I read, was that this generation holds, well over 50% of
considerable buying
wealth.
power, right?
Huge buying power, right? And yet, when you look at advertising and you look at the representation within advertising, you look at the sort of supposed targeting of ads, right, to people, you rarely see,
Me or you.
yeah, represented in it, well, in any meaningful way, right? Like usually it's sort of like a token 60 or 70-year-old who's kind of stuck into, round out the mix or whatever.
Right.
And so, anyway, so that sparked a kind of interesting conversation, and there wasn't a name at the time. And as we got to talking, this name Geezer popped out, right? Which I think does a really amazing job of sort of pivoting this idea, right, of owning and leaning into, I think, this disparagement that I see our culture making, and I see marketers sort of being really late to the party and thinking about this audience as equal to. And so I think there was this thought, right, that youth marketing has sort of run its course, right? It's time for us as advertisers, as marketers, to kind of evolve this notion of audience.
Because predominantly the market's always been 20 to 30-year-olds, kind of driving advertising, right?
I've never in my career not worked on a brief that wasn't 18 to 35, right? 18 to 35 is the sort of you may not defy this. It is the golden calf of advertising, right? As far as demographics and mix goes. And there are a lot of reasons for this, right? There's a kind of doctrine or a dogma, I think, around this notion. And it's not to say that they don't, pay heed, but, or I think in a lot of cases understand, but I think there's a fucked up notion that if you put young people in an ad, and I mean, look no further than the latest quote unquote disruptive Cadillac campaign, right? Cadillac, done by Mother, right?
Yeah.
And it's it looks exactly like the last disruptive campaign done for Cadillac by, name the hot agency of the moment, right? From decades past. And it's it's not working. You know what I mean? Clearly this
because
notion,
you'd be the guy to buy the car.
It's inauthentic to everyone's knowledge of what this car stands for and who it exists for, right? And so even though you can show a bunch of 20-year-olds tootling about in a Cadillac sedan, when have you actually ever seen that shit? You know what I mean? And that it wasn't
a Polestar or something.
Well, maybe a rental car. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Maybe a rental
and they're
car.
laughing about it usually. Can you believe this?
Can you believe we're in a Cadillac?
It's fucking crazy. Right. Well, then how do you think brands should be responding? do they need to kind of bring in consult from?
So, I mean, I think this is the thing, right? This is what I think I'm stumbling across, right? And I think I'm sort of midway through working out what this is. But I think that the future of advertising, right, is one in which we are able to create authentic connections with audiences, with people, with customers, right? And I think it is really then incumbent on brands and marketers to understand who what that authentic representation is.
Yeah.
And and own that shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not be sort of put off by these dogmas, not be put off by these kind of fear-based notions that we might be seen as old or weak or enfeebled or, you know what I mean? What have you. And instead sort of lean into that. You know what I mean? And embrace that and celebrate it, right?
Well,
because I think that's what people are hungry for.
Yeah. Well, and I think authenticity now has almost got when people say that.
I mean, where do you even begin?
Yeah, exactly.
In this world of AI. But I think it's weird as soon as you have these new technologies emerge, right? It's almost like you can almost see culture pivot.
Yes.
Instantaneously, at least my interests, to these feelings of realness, you know what I mean? Authenticity, handmadeness, you know what I mean? Care, love.
Well, and I've appreciated
where is that?
In our talks and even knowing you since you kind of got this going, that I love that every time I check in, you're in this process of figuring it out. And I think that's the other thing is people are terrified, creative people are terrified to share that part of the experience, right? And maybe that's even a little bit thing that gets pulled out into some of the brand is that maybe brands actively figure it out in space. And I know we're doing that with like testing and shit like that, that they're kind of figuring it out on a numbers thing, but like also finding out what resonates in a more human kind of way might be the next thing too.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think, I don't know. I mean, I think our thesis is, right, like part of the future of this business is just embracing this as a dimension to inclusivity, as a dimension to smart marketing, right?
Yeah.
That this audience has a lot of spending power, and that it is kind of idiotic to, I mean, it's like ignore that at your peril.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But okay, so I mean, and I'll segue here, but I mean, part of this idea around authentic connections has led me more to this, I think, question around whether an agency like Geezer, whether a brand like Geezer can be more than an agency, right? Or should be actually more.
That's what I always think
than
in
an
like,
agency. Because
is an agency fairly too narrow even?
Right. Because I think where I'm seeing this go, right, is more into the realm of community. And I mean, in some sense, like this is a great model, right, for a community that you've built around, you know, sharing creative thinking and engaging in discourse around what we do for a living and how we kind of shape culture as a result or as a byproduct.
That is an interesting thing, is I feel like you were I was fascinated to watch the kind of interest that was generated on LinkedIn and stuff like that when you posted that. And I do think that, you know, any industry that stops having discourse, like I felt like advertising at least stopped talking about some of that kind of stuff. The more nitty gritty of like, where's the audiences? Who are we really being truthful to ourselves? I don't think that gets talked about. And maybe that was the refreshing part of all of this, I felt like. And it's funny you bring up the discourse thing because it's super important. I was listening to some design podcasts, and there's some long form content out there on design that is still being published, but how many people are digesting it. And Rick Pointer, the guy who wrote this one thing, was like, he's like, the act of sitting down to learn something doesn't really exist anymore. So his worry is, what will that do to discourse in industry? Meaning, like, will design stop being as a dedicated art form,
distinct profession?
Yeah, exactly. That's what he said. Gave it really like.
I mean,
legs.
I think in a lot of ways, it's like it's a testament to his work, right? Is that I feel like design permeates culture in a more substantial way than ever before, too, right? And so I think more people understand what design is. They talk about it.
I think more people also just expect it.
Well, yeah,
too.
No, exactly. But, and I think the tools, right? The tools of the trade have also evolved to this point where we're all designers, right? Like we're all like, and I think to a large degree too, we're all creative people. You know what I mean? Like I see that a lot.
We talked a little bit about that term for creative people. Right. Like it's weird, but it's also like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. Specifically the question was around how you feel about getting called a creative. Right. Because it's a weird,
there's a few people in here that might have an opinion
turn
on
of
that.
phrase that exists in mostly advertising, right?
Yeah.
Like where it's like, oh, the creatives said no, you know? And it's like,
it is a thing that like strategy or account people use as like,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was something that I think everyone at Crispin sort of laughed at, but I mean, there was this kind of conceit there still because it was, I don't know, in some, there's insecurity, you know what I mean? Like in all of us, right? That, and especially in our younger years, you know what I mean? Like I think that sometimes you can lead yourself to believe that if you don't defend your turf, you know what I mean?
Right.
That somehow it's going to be taken away from you and that you're going to be exposed as an imposter and you know what I mean? Some account person is going to do your job.
Yeah, but I think where I've seen the beef lately is like the implication it could have to the client or the person receiving the goods.
Yeah.
Is that, maybe they're not strategic. Maybe they're not technical, whatever it might be. And I think that's where I've seen some of the pushback on the.
But I mean, I am kind of excited about this future where, I don't know, maybe you don't need a formal design education. You know what I mean? Or maybe a design education is baked into every education.
Right.
You know what I mean? I love that idea, right?
I've had
I
a couple
love this.
undergrad experiences where it'd be like someone's killing it, like in like 100 level class, and you're like, I had a design program in high school, and I'm like, that's freaking amazing,
Right.
So,
or it's like I've used Canva since I was 13 years old. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and it is the way that I've met designers working, and there's a few that come to mind that are younger.
Yeah.
That was just the way they expressed themselves too. Like I made movies and I made social posts and stuff. They weren't doing it kind of like the way you started out making art as like, and it was just the way they expressed themselves.
Yeah.
So, all right. So a little bit of mixing it up here. We go to what I always call fun time. So these are gonna be some kind of like choose them scenarios. There's no wrong answers. So I'm just gonna dive in. Disrupt or refine?
Pardon me?
Disrupt or refine?
Depends.
Let's see, this is a fine answer.
Yeah.
Art or design?
I'm going to say design.
No kidding. I thought you were just gonna say yes. Yeah, that's what I thought you were gonna say. Storytelling or strategy?
Oh no, we were laughing around the studio the other day. Like the best response to anything, right? These days, so what? You know what I mean? Like, so what?
That'll put people on their heels. Yeah.
So what?
Storytelling or strategy?
Storytelling.
Recognition through awards or recognition through impact results?
What about just feeling good about what you've made? You know what I mean?
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think,
We talked a little bit about the awards world and do you play in it? Have you played in it? What's that do? And there was a slippery slope. And I love that you said my answer might be different.
Well,
now,
I think
at this stage of my career.
answer has evolved, right? And, so Crispin was a very awarded shop, right? And so everyone expected that. And, it was a machine. Actually, the executive producer that was hired every year to produce the award show videos, because there were hundreds, if not thousands of them put in every year, it was a machine, right? So there was one person in the agency whose full-time job all year long,
just submitting,
was just coordinating, recording, refining, approving, submitting those award show videos and boards and what have you, right? And without fail, every year, that person quit.
So that tells you.
And moved on.
But that was enough.
So when we started Made, we were very adamant and very clear that we were not going to enter award shows, right? Like that is not what we were about. And we were not going to, waste our time, you know what I mean? Like trying to sort of fluff up what the agency was doing. And, and I look back on that and I kind of regret having made that decision. And the reason that I regret it is that it was all well and good for, Dave Schiff and myself and Scott to say that, right? Because we had those awards, right? Like we received those recognitions. But for the people working for us, right, that were just coming out of school, that were on their way up, right, like that did not boost their careers, right? Like that was not helping them. And it in a number of ways, right? Because it didn't require that they think through that lens, right? Of like, how is this going to be competitive out there in this world of ideas, right? And the other one was like, I don't think it gave them the same aegis that we had, right? It sort of deprived them of that leg up. You know what I mean? Because it does put you out there in the world in a way that requires you to have that conversation, like with other people and with yourself, right? And I think that evolves you as a person. And so, I don't know, like I would definitely do it differently.
I just love it that you're free enough to be like, I can change my opinion on this.
Yeah. Right. Reserve the right to change your mind.
Yes. Timeless or innovative?
We were talking about this the other day too, like about this idea of how projects age in your book, right? And how work. And so, I think along the course of my career, I've always thought in terms of, because I had this guy, this professor, and this somewhat, this very charming megalomaniac who was very, very into like promoting like his own ideas, right? And the importance of them and sticking up for those things. And I don't know, like I think that, yeah.
I think it's funny when you mentioned like how it fits into your book, and like how fast do you get like old Flash projects out of there, or like a weird microsite or something that only worked on Samsung phone from
like
1942.
this idea. I like the basis of this idea, right? Which is whether we're conscious of it or not, we're all part of art history, right? Like we're all part of this design history, and so we're all kind of engaged in a dialogue, and that's what the work is. It's a part of that. And so, I don't know, like I did used to see my book in terms of things that had this like lasting power, right? That could age a decade and still feel relevant and fresh, and something that I would want to pick back up and re-engage with.
Do you still feel that way now?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, about certain things, yeah. I mean, I've weeded other things out, but yeah. I mean,
I think that's an important
thing. I think
thing
you have
for
to edit yourself.
all people managing portfolios is like, look at it once in a while and figure out what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest or the West?
I'm definitely a Western person, right? Like I've lived on the East and in the East, and we briefly were toying with the idea. We owned a house in Charleston, and we're toying with the idea prior to the pandemic of moving there. And I did have this like, I think nurse a secret fantasy about being a Southerner, you know what I mean? Or like living among the Southerners and,
Yeah, I can see
like
that.
a Faulknerian kind of tour down there. But no, West.
I could see you having your mint julep on the patio, on the veranda.
I don't think I could live in Portland or Seattle. You know what I mean? Like the sunshine, I think, has become part of me.
It would wreck your after run, post-run glow.
Big time.
Creative freedom or design constraints?
I think knowing when both are really important, and applicable, I think is, kind of what I'm into.
Creative freedom terrifies me, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I like requirements. Dude, give me a box to work in.
See, I'm increasingly like toying and drawn toward this notion of like making things that are seemingly arbitrary just because you followed a wild hare, and I think that there's a place for that. You know what I mean? Like in everyone's practice. And I think that we do this unwittingly, even when we think that we're imposing these constraints. So, I don't know.
Digital or physical? Screens or print? Maybe that's easier.
I mean, it has advantages. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a Luddite at all. I think that embracing technology, and especially new technology, is like really important. But I'm also, I think that increasingly as a practice, I find that drawing is a really important thing. It's like the sort of bedrock, I think, for me of my practice.
Interesting.
So yeah, I actually draw, and I draw, I make drawings for myself every night, most nights.
Drawing is thinking though, like, and that's the thing that, another thing that terrifies me is we've only been doing this for 100 years, right?
Well,
it's not wired into our
I think I'm trying to loosen the grip of my mind on the things that I make. And it's really hard to shake that.
Get out of your own way.
Well, yeah. Well, get out of like overthinking everything. You know what I mean? And just let things be a little more spontaneous, intuitive, like trust that you know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if you don't know.
Last one, legacy or reinvention?
I think there is no legacy without constant reinvention. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So as we kind of like wrap up here, we've got to talk about it. AI, its impact on everything we're doing these days. You love innovation. I think that's a cool thing too, that like you do have these practices in your background of where you're like tried and true. You just know how to do it. Like you do a lot of painting, drawing, that kind of stuff. We talked about that. But what do you think, like with AI and automation on the rise, like what's its impact like on the future state of like human creativity, and it could be like advertising, design.
I think it's really opening things up in a major way. I think it's going to open up. It does a couple things, right? I think it makes knowledge increasingly obsolete, right? Like I think the notion that as educators, you know what I mean, like your job is to instill knowledge, it's out the window. You know what I mean? Because I think that knowledge isn't a barrier for anyone anymore. And also increasingly the ability to make things isn't a barrier anymore either. You know what I mean? And so what do you do with that? You know, I think that opens up tremendous possibility, you know, in terms of what you're able to engage in. You know, and Paul Scheer, one of my design heroes, right, in terms of practice, I don't know, this was a couple months ago, but I mean, had maybe 6 months ago, she'd done this illustration series, and I think it was for some government site. This was like pre-Trump. And they built this sort of model, right, this LLM that made this kind of series of illustrations for her, and they'd set these parameters, and then they started tweaking these, you know what I mean, like little variables within that kind of system to produce these. I mean, and it just like instantaneously regurgitates 100,000, spot illustrations in.
Yeah, what program was this for? It was crazy because the sheer amount of illustrations, if they had done it by hand or even on a computer, a human doing it.
It was like a physical, and really it's more like a cost thing, right? Like it's just a budget parameter that you know what I mean? Like you couldn't ever do that because no client would ever pay for that amount of labor, right? Like that amount. Just like.
But I think the interesting thing about that is it could have been, because it's governmental, and it could have been this just
dog shit,
very run-of-the-mill experience. It actually has an experience now.
Oh yeah.
Right? It has like talking about like barriers to learning, like it's proven that like if people don't like interacting with something, that they'll be less likely to glean anything out of it, right? So she may have like crossed that barrier too because of the affordance of AI making the thing. It made people learn.
Oh yeah.
I would bet.
Anyway, I was like also blown away because, Paul Scheer's no spring chicken. You know what I mean? And she's still sort of like really pushing the boundaries of like what this technology can do, right? In a major way for a huge client with, global visibility. And, it's
a very formal organization too, if you think about it, because government and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate your time here. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you guys.